What's good, y'all? Y'all know what it is. Onyx Report's Black Masculinist news for the day. Hope you're well. Hope everything is going as well as possible. Decided to take a look today at something. I've been watching Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And it may be a little early to do a complete review because it's halfway through the series. There's 6 episodes. They come out every Friday on Disney Plus. They're 3 episodes in. So far, they've been pretty action-packed, pretty entertaining. My personal stamp of approval is in their presentation of Isaiah Bradley, who, for those of you who are comic book heads, know was the first Black Captain America. The way they wrote the story, he comes about after Captain America, it exists, but he is a product of the U.S. military experimenting on Black soldiers to reproduce the super soldier serum. So we haven't seen him live action or in any comic books or in any animated series in quite a while. He only had 1 series. He did have a son and a grandson that were presented. His grandson is in the Young Avengers, so I think they're setting up for that on, in the MCU series or whatever. But we hadn't seen Isaiah before, so they finally showed him, played by Carl Lumbly, an actor I respect. He played Mantis back in the day. He's been in a million things. He's been John Johns in the JLA animated series. So shout out to him. But they did a good job with his presentation. He was in episode 2. Hopefully they'll go back to him. They referenced him in episode 3, but we don't know if we'll see him again. And I can't imagine that they'll choose an actor of Carl Lumbly's status and not use him again. But there's so much more there to explore, right? Because we know Falcon, of course, if you're not familiar, is one of the Avengers who in the comic books for generations, for decades, has been a sidekick. And that was the problem with a lot of Black heroes. They were sidekicks to white heroes, Falcon being one of the principal ones. So now that Cap is gone, he has the opportunity to become Captain America. Steve Rogers himself gives him the shield, and the first thing he did is turn it over to the government. He didn't feel up for it. They haven't fully explored his reservations. He's only hinted at them, but he hasn't really laid them out there. And part of that has, you can interpret that in a number of different ways. I personally took issue with it. One of the directors is Black. Who's Black? The director is Black. His name escapes me at the moment, but he said that, any Black hero would have reservations about taking a shield like that and all it represents. Fair enough. Don't have a problem with that. But you didn't really present Sam or Falcon as having reservations solely. Like if he had reservations on political grounds, historical grounds, if he had reservations based on the history of America, and he hasn't said any of those things, that would be potent. I would dig that, especially when you bring in Isaiah Bradley as a character. His reservations, however, strike me to be more about whether or not he could live up to people's expectations and, do as good of a job, so on and so forth. Those strike me with a different tenor. That is not about a political critique as much as it's about imposter syndrome. Now, imposter syndrome in and of itself is something that many people go through, a wide variety of folks go through, but in relation to how it impacts the Black community, it has everything to do with Black folk being in positions that were not designed with them in mind, right? Coming out of a legacy of being institutionally barred from certain types of participation in American society, some people feel as if they don't belong even when they've done what they can to achieve it. I had a chance years ago. So as you guys know, I come out of Africana Studies. I teach in Africana Studies at Fresno State. And there's a scholar in Africana Studies whose work I've enjoyed for quite a while, probably the last 20 years. His name is Dr. Robin Kelly, currently teaches at UCLA. And, he's brilliant cat, right? Brilliant. But I had a chance to go to a lecture he gave, I think it was at the African American Museum in Los Angeles years ago. Might have been like 15 years ago. And he talked about imposter syndrome, but I don't think he named it. I don't think he used the actual term, but what he was saying was when he was teaching in New York, I believe, he might have been at NYU, but he said, he's teaching there. Now he's brilliant. Books are brilliant. And analysis, critique, brilliant, but he was sitting there and he said something along the lines of, when I was teaching there, I kept expecting them, to walk down the hallway and come into my classroom and say, oh, we made a mistake. You're not the one we hired. Or, you know what I mean? Like he was talking about himself in the context of not being deserving of where he was, despite all the work he had done, despite the training, despite the dissertation, despite the books, the lectures, the courses he taught. He still, at his level, was waiting for someone to come in and say, this was a mistake. You're not the one we really meant to hire. You know what I mean? This is the crux of imposter syndrome. And it was mind blowing for me as a graduate student to hear somebody who I respected, who was at a level that, you know, I was aspiring to in terms of being able to get my doctorate and teach in the field and all that kind of stuff. And here, even he was talking about not feeling it. Now, as for myself going through graduate school, I did my master's in a year before I was 21, but I didn't do my PhD until a few years later. So I started my PhD probably 3 years after that. And it took about 8 years. I was raising a family, taking care of a family, working multiple jobs, that whole kind of thing. My imposter syndrome was a little lighter. It came about in a way where, on a very subconscious level, I never thought about finishing it. I just did one day at a time. Each homework assignment, each reading assignment, each paper I was assigned, each exam I had to take. I took them one at a time, and I never really thought about when I was graduating, what I would do. I just literally just looked down on the ground and just watched one foot move past the next one. So that was my version of imposter syndrome. It never dawned on me that I would ever finish. And a lot of that was because, by the time you get to the doctoral level, you don't see a lot of people that look like you. And I didn't. And I was in, cultural studies. I had several degrees in Africana Studies. And in those fields, you saw people that looked like you. But when you ventured out of that, there weren't very many. You know what I mean? And I was at the Claremont colleges where, they have a hard time with African-American scholars or even dark-skinned black folk, particularly in positions of faculty. You saw very few. There's definitely a color cast kind of thing going on. There's definitely a nationality thing that we can go into at another time. But that being said, I just took one step at a time. It never dawned. If I was still in grad school now, I wouldn't be upset. I wouldn't be frustrated. I'd just still be taking one step at a time because I couldn't really, push myself to picture what it would be like to finish. In a way, that's also like saying I didn't think I was worthy to have a doctorate. You know what I mean? Those are the kind of things that black folk who do achieve at a certain level can experience. Here's an article out of HuffPost.com. It's entitled Imposter Syndrome Hits Harder When You're Black. And basically it starts out by saying imposter syndrome and racial discrimination work hand in hand to tear down our self-esteem and mental health. The term imposter syndrome was coined by psychologists Pauline R. Clance and Suzanne A. Imes in 1978 to describe an internal experience of intellectual phoniness in people who believe that they are not intelligent, capable, or creative despite evidence of high achievement. So this means people who have achieved. These aren't people that are sitting around hoping to. These are doctors, surgeons, scientists, intellectuals. These are people who have achieved already, who are still grappling with this. These are not people who are aspiring to achieve. So before you start dismissing people, no, these are people who have already achieved, and this is why I brought up Dr. Robin Kelly, people who had already achieved, who grapple with this. And it says, to put it simply, imposter syndrome is the voice in your head that tells you you're not good enough, that you're a fake on the verge of being found out. An estimated 70% of Americans, not just black folk, struggle with these intrusive thoughts brought on by imposter syndrome. And while imposter syndrome is not a diagnosable condition, it can result in negative mental health outcomes. Mental health experts believe that prolonged feelings of isolation and stress brought on by a phenomenon can lead to other DSM-recognized illnesses such as anxiety and depression, right? So it says people of color like myself are particularly vulnerable to this debilitating sensation. That's because for us, imposter syndrome is just an imaginary voice in our heads. We can hear it loud and clear when we receive almost daily messages from society that we truly don't belong. A study conducted by Kevin Coakley, a professor at the University of Texas at Austin, found that imposter syndrome can add to the stress minorities already feel. In response to the microaggressions we experience in real life, we become our own aggressors, filling ourselves with negative internal dialogue that can result in poor physical and mental care. With imposter syndrome, it becomes too easy to believe that the lies both society and your brain tell you. It becomes too easy to believe the lies. Okay. African Americans are 20% more likely than the general population to experience a mental health problem. However, we're also the least likely to receive a diagnosis or treatment. And there are some economic factors that play into that as well. Nevertheless, you can find this on HuffPost.com. It's entitled Imposter Syndrome Hits Harder When You're Black. My point here, when I get back to Sam, is that I think this is what Sam is grappling with. And it's two very different things to have a very purposeful political critique of America and holding the shield and embodying all that's supposed to represent, while being a black man who knows the history of America and how it's treated and continues to treat black men. That would be a very different tenor if I were directing. It would come across very differently, right? But I think what Sam is grappling with more so, and you can see in the thumbnail, which is the perfect, representation from what I'm saying, is imposter syndrome. And I do hope they deal with it. There is something to be said for it. There is something to be said about it, in regard to black folk. There's a degree of unwelcomeness that many still experience, especially when you start to achieve in ways that contradict stereotypes about black folk, and you find yourself in areas. And this was the thing I noticed, from going from high school to doctorate. Every level I went up, the fewer and fewer black folk I saw, right? And that includes being faculty. Everywhere I've been faculty, black folk have been in the minority, most particularly black men. So I can identify with the character on multiple grounds. I just hope that they, articulate this a little better than they have so far. It's been a little disappointing as far as that. I wanted that to be a little more forthright. I wanted Sam to be a little more clear, a little more articulate about what he's going through. But this is what I suspect it is more so than a critique. I suspect it's imposter syndrome. And again, this is something that many people deal with no matter where you are. You can be driving truck. You can be, a medical doctor. It really doesn't matter, because it's not about what you're actually doing. It's really about a response to an environment that's inherently hostile to black men in many measures, right? And it becomes one of those debilitating things where your own internal negative self-talk can really impede what you're doing. You know what I mean? And then it's also supported by the negative self-talk, or the negative talk, I should say, coming from outside that can also seem to reinforce what you're experiencing. But here's the key. I know most people who are experiencing this are not going to come into the comment section. It is what it is. I mean, we know you put something out in the public and media and people just, jump all over it, and they will reinforce every negative stereotype about you, every negative quality they can. People enjoy being keyboard warriors. They like to, they'll do things to you in media that they would never do face to face. But here's the thing. If you've ever experienced this, or if you ever will, what I want you to keep in mind is 9 times out of 10, wherever you are, you earned it. You got there for a reason. Now, if you cheated on all your exams and became a medical doctor and you don't know what you're doing, you deserve to have imposter syndrome. But if you worked your ass off to get where you are, you earned every degree, you took every class, you took every step, every training, every if you followed what you needed to do to progress and advance in your chosen craft, remember that in moments of doubt. Remember what you've achieved, what you've accomplished, and where you are. And remember that none of it is an accident. None of it. You've earned it. Own it. And be aggressive about that ownership. Because as the article points out, this can be a debilitating kind of dynamic. I've seen tenured professors who talk themselves out of writing books on areas that they are masterful in, but they won't put pen to paper because of that internal self-talk. Some of the most brilliant scholars I've had a chance to study under, suffer from this on one level or another. And I really hope we begin to challenge it. So which is why I'm hoping that they deal with this, kind of forthrightly in this Falcon and the Winter Soldier series. I will say, as a small little aside, I wasn't interested in seeing anyone pick up the shield. And this, I'm talking now strictly as a comic book head. I didn't want to see anyone pick up the shield that didn't have the serum in them. I don't think Sam is going to get the serum. Kind of hoped he would. I just thought, look, for me, if you're going to be Cap, you should be able to at least be at peak physical condition and be able to do above and beyond what the everyday person can do. So I personally would like to see him get the serum, but according to the comics, he never really did. So I don't know if they're really going to go that route. I do think he will end up getting the shield and reclaiming it. There was a mention, spoilers, there was a mention that Bucky, the Winter Soldier, said he would pick up the shield himself if need be, which of course did occur in the comics. He was Captain America for a while. But if Falcon is going to do it, I do hope he gets the super soldier serum and he's able to kind of take it to another level. That said, he still could fight pretty well with the shield and all his other tools. So I will admit, when I first read the comics where I saw him fight with the shield, he did really well. And I underestimated that. So the way they wrote it, he did. That could happen again. He's extremely skillful in the series. If you watch the first 15 minutes of the first episode, your mind will be blown in terms of how well they portrayed Falcon's physical prowess and his ability to fight, especially in aerial combat. It's ridiculous. They're doing a really good job as far as that's concerned. I don't really have a whole lot of negative critiques of the series. I'm going to wait until they finish it to see what their overall kind of message is. But halfway through, he's still not articulated himself. And, as I said, I think imposter syndrome is going to play a role, but we'll see. That said, I hope you guys enjoyed. I'd like to know your thoughts about the series. Go ahead and put them in the comment section. And we'll keep an eye on this until they finish up in the next few weeks. All right, y'all. Peace.